Section Un. Lena. The fluorescent hum of the Westgate Galleria was a familiar comfort, a backdrop to Saturday errands that Lena usually navigated on autopilot. Today, however, a knot of unease had tightened in her stomach since morning, a lingering residue from a week of unsettling news reports, riots in distant cities, a strange, aggressive flu. Dismissed by commentators as isolated incidents, fear-mongering, but the knot remained. Leo, her 6-year-old son, was oblivious, his small hand sticky in hers as he chattered about the new Blaze Ranger toy he'd seen advertised. His bright innocence was a fragile shield against the world's encroaching shadows, a shield Lena felt an overwhelming urge to reinforce with her own body if necessary. "Just the bookstore, sweetie, then we can look at the Blaze Rangers, okay?" Lena said, her voice a little too bright. Leo, however, was easily bribed by the promise of plastic heroism and nodded enthusiastically, his blonde curls bouncing. They were halfway to Page's Nosh when the first discordant note struck through the mall's usual symphony of muzak and chatter, a scream. Not the playful shriek of a child, but something raw, torn from an adult throat. It was sharp, quickly swallowed by the ambient noise, yet it snagged Lena's attention like a fishhook. More followed, a scattered chorus of terror that pricked the hairs on her arms. People ahead of them stopped, heads turning, a ripple of confusion, then alarm, spread through the shoppers. "What's that, Mommy?" Leo asked, his small face tilted up, blue eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "I don't know, baby. Stay close." Her grip on his hand tightened instinctively. The unease in her gut flared into active alarm. Another scream, closer this time, punctuated by the sound of something heavy crashing, display racks perhaps. Then, the wave broke. A surge of people, their faces masks of panic, running towards them from the direction of the food court. A man in a business suit, tie askew, stumbled, his briefcase skittering across the polished floor. He didn't stop to retrieve it. "Run." The word was a ragged gasp from multiple mouths, a collective understanding that transcended any need for explanation. Lena didn't hesitate. "Leo, we have to go." She pulled him, trying to turn against the tide, to get back towards the department store entrance they'd used, but the corridor was already choking with bodies. The force of the crowd was terrifying, an unthinking, panicked beast. Someone shoved her hard from behind. Her hand slipped from Leo's. "Leo." The name ripped from her, raw with a sudden, visceral terror that eclipsed everything else. She twisted, frantic, scanning the churning legs and torsos. He was gone. Swallowed by the chaos. For a horrifying second, the world tilted, sound muted, everything narrowing to the empty space where his small hand had been. No, 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 no. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She pushed against the current, screaming his name, her voice thin against the rising cacophony of fear. "Leo, Leo." She shoved people aside, earning angry shouts and frightened glares, but she didn't care. He was small, vulnerable. The images that flashed through her mind, him trampled, lost, alone, were unbearable. Then she saw a flash of his bright red jacket near the entrance of a shoe store, its metal security gate half closed. He was cowering, tears streaming down his face, his small body pressed against the grimy glass. Relief, so potent it was dizzying, washed over her, immediately followed by a fresh surge of adrenaline. "Leo." She fought her way to him, dropping to her knees, heedless of the people stumbling over her. "Oh, thank God. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" He flung his arms around her neck, burying his face in her shoulder, his small body trembling. "Mommy, there was a monster." "Shh, it's okay. I'm here." She held him tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. A monster? Kids said things like that. But the terror in the air, the screams that still echoed. That's when she saw it, through the gaps in the fleeing crowd. A woman, or what had once been a woman, was on top of a fallen man, her movements jerky, unnatural. Her head was bent, and as she lifted it, Lena's breath hitched. Her face was a ruin of grayish skin, eyes milky and vacant, jaw distended. A dark, viscous fluid matted her hair and stained her chin, dripping onto the man who lay twitching feebly beneath her. The sounds she made were not human, wet, guttural snarls. Bile rose in Lena's throat. This isn't a riot. This isn't the flu. The news reports, the unease, It all coalesced into a single, horrifying understanding. This was something new, something monstrous. The exits. They had to get to an exit. She pulled Leo up. "We need to leave, sweetie. Now." But as she looked towards the main concourse entrance, the one nearest the parking lot, she saw why the crowd had been so frantic to flee in the opposite direction. The glass doors were shattered, and through the jagged openings, more of those things were shambling in, their movements clumsy yet relentless. They were in the parking lot too, lurching between cars. There was no escape that way. The department store they'd come through? A quick glance showed a similar scene unfolding at its distant entrance, figures stumbling through, the glint of broken glass. Every primary exit seemed compromised. They were trapped, deep within the labyrinth of the mall, with Leo sobbing against her, and the monsters, his word, now chillingly accurate, closing in. She backed away, pulling Leo with her, deeper into the shoe store. Its gate was only half down. Could they hide? Could they find another way? Her mind raced, a maelstrom of fear and desperate calculation. Leo was whimpering, his small hands clutching her jeans. "Mommy, I'm scared." "I know, baby, I know." Her voice was a strained whisper. She peered around the edge of the shoe store's entrance. The main corridor was thinning of fleeing people, but the shambling figures were growing in number, drawn by the noise, the scent of the living. One of them, a man in a tattered security uniform, its arm hanging at an unnatural angle, turned its milky gaze directly towards them. It let out a low, gurgling moan and began to lurch in their direction. Two more followed its lead, their feet dragging, their eerie silence more terrifying than any scream. Cornered. The word echoed in Lena's mind, cold and final. The bright, sterile environment of the mall had become a tomb, and the dead were shuffling towards them. Leo's small, terrified face looked up at her, trusting her to make it right, and in that moment, a primal resolve solidified within Lena's terror. She would not let them take him. Not while she was breathing. But how? How could she fight this? The creature in the security uniform was 10 feet away, its empty eyes fixed on them. A grotesque parody of protection. Section 2. Marcus. The first indication Marcus had that Saturday was going to be anything other than mind-numbingly dull was the sudden explosion of red on camera 7, food court. Not a fire, but chaos. Figures blurring, a surge of movement too fast, too erratic for the usual lunchtime rush. He leaned closer to the monitor, a stale donut halfway to his mouth. "What in the Sam Hill?" he muttered, tapping the screen to zoom. The resolution was grainy, but he could make out people falling, others scrambling over them. It looked like a brawl, a bad one. He reached for the internal PA microphone. "Security to food court, code 3, possible large disturbance." Then camera 9, overlooking the main concourse near Sears, showed a similar scene. And camera 4, by the east entrance. It was spreading, or starting everywhere at once. This wasn't a fight. This was something else. A cold dread, alien to his usual cynicism, began to seep into him. The direct line to the mall manager's office buzzed. Marcus grunted, hit the speaker. "Yeah?" "Marcus, what is happening out there? Mr. Blank." Henderson's voice was shrill, already laced with panic. "There are reports of violence. People are screaming. Did you call the police? Secure the merchandise." "Working on it, Henderson." Marcus was already dialing 911 on his cell, the landline having gone strangely dead. Secure the merchandise? Seriously? He could see a woman on camera 7 tear into a man's throat. This wasn't shoplifting. The 911 call went to an automated message. "All circuits are busy. Please try again later." He swore under his breath. This was bad. This was city-wide bad. The mall's emergency lockdown system was old, clunky, but it was their only hope of containment. Steel shutters on main entrances, magnetic locks on secondary doors. "Henderson, I'm initiating lockdown protocol Alpha. Get to the designated safe zone. Now." The safe zone was a reinforced section of the mall's administrative offices with its own emergency generator. It was supposed to be for earthquakes or bomb threats, not this. "Lockdown? Are you sure? What about the shoppers?" Henderson bleated. "They'll have to fend for themselves if they're not near an exit or a store that can secure itself. This is out of control." Marcus slammed his fist on the console, activating the sequence. Warning sirens began to wail throughout the Galleria, a mournful, piercing sound. Red lights pulsed on his monitor bank as shutters began their slow, grinding descent. Too slow. He could see the things, the attackers, already inside, moving with that awful, jerky gait, ignoring the alarms, ignoring everything but the living. A frantic banging on the security office door. Marcus tensed, hand going to the heavy-duty maglite he kept for unruly teenagers. "Who is it?" "It's Sarah. From Burger Barn, please let me in." A young, terrified voice. He cracked the door. Sarah Jenkins, 17, freckled, usually bubbly, now chalk-white, eyes wide with terror. Behind her, a handful of other dazed, petrified shoppers, including a woman clutching a whimpering child. And, predictably, Mr. Place. Henderson, looking like he was about to have a stroke, his face puce. They're eating people," Sarah sobbed, stumbling inside as Marcus opened the door wider. "My brother, Mikey, he was at the arcade. I couldn't find him." Henderson pushed past her. "Marcus, this is unacceptable. The liability. We need to get these people to the safe zone. My office." "Your office isn't going to hold if those things decide they want in," Marcus said grimly, watching the monitors. The main entrance shutters were down, but he'd seen at least a dozen of the infected get inside before they closed. And the Sears entrance, one of the shutters had jammed halfway. A stream of them was pouring in there. "We need a better plan than cowering in your damn office." "What are you suggesting? We stay here? With them?" Henderson gestured wildly at the monitors. "This office is reinforced," Marcus said, more to himself than Henderson. "Steel door, no windows to the public corridor. Access to the service tunnels. But not for long if a crowd of them piles up." He looked at Sarah, still crying about her brother. At the mother, Lena, her face a mask of grim determination, her son clinging to her leg. His usually impenetrable cynicism felt a crack. These weren't just shoppers anymore. They were survivors, for now. A sickening thud vibrated through the floor. On camera 12, covering the service corridor leading to the loading docks, he saw it. One of the internal security gates, a heavy steel mesh he'd thought would hold for hours, buckled. A shape, contorted and pale, squeezed through a tear in the metal, then another. They were learning, or just mindlessly persistent. "They're in the service tunnels," Marcus said, his voice flat. The route to Henderson's safe zone was likely compromised. His own office, once a bastion of boredom, now felt like a flimsy trap. Henderson made a choking sound, his eyes bulging as he stared at the monitor showing the breached gate. His authority, always more bluster than substance, visibly crumbled. He sank onto a spare chair, muttering about insurance, about protocols, his words dissolving into meaningless babble. The lights flickered, then died, plunging them into the emergency backup power, dim, red, casting long, dancing shadows. The hum of the main power, the music, the air conditioning, all gone. Replaced by the distant, echoing screams, the closer thuds and scrapes, and the terrified breathing of the people in the small, dark room with him. The mall, his domain for 15 years, had become a charnel house, and Henderson, the supposed leader, was useless, a quivering monument to failed authority. It was up to him. It was always up to him. Section 3. Lena. The guttural moan of the approaching infected security guard seemed to vibrate in Lena's bones. Its milky eyes, devoid of any recognition, were fixed on them. Leo pressed himself so hard against her leg he was practically a limpet, his small whimpers muffled in her jeans. There was no time to think, only to react. She shoved Leo behind her, towards the relative darkness of the shoe store. "Stay back, baby." The infected guard was slow, clumsy, but relentless. Its one good arm reached, fingers stiff and grasping. Lena snatched up the nearest thing, a metal shoehorn, long and heavy, from a display stand. It felt flimsy, ridiculous, against this abomination, but it was all she had. As it lunged, she sidestepped, bringing the shoehorn down with all her strength on its head. There was a sickening, dull thud, like hitting a rotten pumpkin. The creature stumbled, its head lolling, but it didn't fall. It barely seemed to register the blow. A fresh wave of horror washed over Lena. They don't feel pain. It turned, slower this time, and lunged again. She dodged, but its flailing hand caught her arm, fingers like icy vises, a scream caught in her throat. Its fetid breath, smelling of rot and something metallic, washed over her face. Its teeth, yellowed and broken, snapped inches from her cheek. This couldn't be how it ended. Not for her, not for Leo. A surge of pure, primal fury, the ferocity of a mother protecting her young, coursed through her. She twisted, wrenching her arm free, the rough fabric of her sleeve tearing. With her other hand, she jabbed the pointed end of the shoehorn towards its face, aiming for an eye. The metal point sank into the soft tissue of its socket. There was no scream, no human reaction, just a wet, squelching sound. The creature froze, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. It took a shuddering step back, then another, before its legs seemed to give way, and it crumpled to the floor in a heap. It lay still, the shoehorn protruding grotesquely from its eye. Lena stared, gasping for breath, her arm throbbing where it had been grabbed. The adrenaline was a wildfire in her veins. She had killed it, or stopped it. She didn't know the rules of this new, horrific game. "Mommy?" Leo's voice was a tiny thread of sound from the back of the store. She hurried to him, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay." But she wasn't. Something inside her had shifted, hardened. The world she knew was gone, replaced by this nightmare, and to survive it, she would have to become someone she never thought she could be. The immediate threat was gone, but the sounds from the corridor were growing louder. More moans, more shuffling. They couldn't stay here. The front of the shoe store was too exposed. "We need to hide, Leo, deeper inside." She scanned the store, racks of shoes, a few flimsy display stands. At the very back, a door marked, "Stockroom, employees only." Hope, thin but desperate, flickered. She pulled Leo towards it. The door was unlocked. They slipped inside, into a narrow, windowless room crammed with shelves of shoeboxes. It smelled of cardboard and cheap leather. Lena fumbled for a lock, finding a simple deadbolt. She shot it home, the click echoing loudly in the sudden silence. For a moment, they just stood there, listening. Leo was still trembling, but his sobs had quieted to small, hiccuping breaths. Lena sank to the floor, pulling him onto her lap, her own body shaking with reaction. The image of the infected guard, the shoehorn in its eye, was seared into her mind. The silence didn't last. A scraping sound from the corridor outside, then a heavy thud against the stockroom door. Lena's heart leaped into her throat. Another thud, harder this time. And another. They knew, or sensed, they were in here. Leo buried his face in her chest. "They're going to get in," he whispered, his voice hoarse with terror. "No, they won't, baby. I won't let them." But the door was flimsy wood, the lock basic. It wouldn't hold for long against determined pressure. She looked around wildly. The shelves were bolted to the wall, but they were laden with heavy boxes. Could she barricade it? Just as she was about to try and drag a section of shelving, she heard voices. Not the guttural moans of the infected, but human voices, urgent and panicked, from the other side of the stockroom door. "Anywhere else to go? That corridor's crawling with them," a man's gruff voice said. "The main office is too far. We'll never make it," a younger female voice cried out. Then, a heavy thud that wasn't from the infected. Someone was trying the handle, rattling it. "Hello? Is anyone in there? We need shelter." The man's voice called out, louder now. Lena froze. Survivors? Or something worse? In this new world, who could you trust? But the alternative was waiting for the infected to break down the door. She looked at Leo, his eyes wide and pleading. Another, more desperate rattle of the doorknob. Then, a splintering crack appeared in the wood near the lock as something heavy slammed into it from the outside. Not the infected. Their attacks were more mindless, less focused. This was a deliberate attempt to force the door. Fear warred with a sliver of hope. These could be people who could help, or they could be desperate, dangerous. The door groaned again, the wood around the deadbolt splintering further. It was going to give way any second, one way or another. Lena tensed, ready to defend Leo, unsure if she was about to face saviors or a new kind of monster. Section 4. Sarah. The stockroom door buckled again, a jagged crack spiderwebbing out from the force of Marcus's shoulder. "Last chance," he yelled, his voice strained. "Open up, or we're coming through." Inside, Sarah could hear a child whimpering. Her heart ached for them, whoever they were. Mikey, her little brother, was out there somewhere in this nightmare. The thought was a constant, agonizing throb beneath her terror. She'd last seen him mesmerized by a new racing game in the arcade near the food court, the epicenter of this horror. She'd told him she'd be right back after her break. Guilt gnawed at her. The door suddenly flew inward, not from Marcus's efforts, but unlocked from within. A woman stood there, fierce and pale, a small boy clinging to her legs. She held a long, wicked-looking metal shoehorn like a weapon. For a tense moment, no one moved, a standoff in the dim, cramped space. Marcus, breathing heavily, lowered the fire extinguisher he'd been about to use as a ram. "We're survivors," he grunted, his eyes scanning the woman and child, then the small stockroom. Not them. The woman, Lena, slowly lowered the shoehorn, her gaze flicking between Marcus, Sarah, and the ashen-faced Mr. Henderson, who was hovering uselessly in the narrow corridor behind them. "There are more of them outside," Lena said, her voice tight. "They were at the door." "We know," Marcus said. "This whole damn mall is crawling." He pushed past her slightly to peer through the now open doorway into the shoe store, then quickly pulled back. "They're still out there. We need to secure this." Together, they managed to wedge the broken door shut and braced it with a heavy shelving unit dragged from the stockroom wall, laden with boxes of unsold boots. It was a temporary fix, at best. The air in the small, windowless administrative office Marcus had led them to from the security room felt thick with fear and stale sweat. This office was connected to the shoe store stockroom via a rarely used internal door Marcus knew about from his endless patrols. It was slightly larger, with a desk and a few filing cabinets, but no windows to the outside world. Lena sat on the floor, cradling her son, Leo, who had finally fallen into an exhausted, uneasy sleep. She looked utterly spent, but her eyes were alert, watchful. Sarah found herself drawn to her, a silent understanding passing between them, the desperate need to protect, to find loved ones. "My brother," Sarah began, her voice trembling. "Mikey, he's 10. He was in the arcade. Do you think there's any chance?" Marcus, who was rummaging through the desk drawers, grunted without looking up. "Kid, if he was near the food court when this hit, don't get your hopes up. We need to focus on the living. Us." His words were harsh, brutal, but Sarah saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not cruelty, but a weary pragmatism. Lena, however, looked at Sarah with a deep, maternal sympathy. "Don't listen to him entirely," she said softly. "Hope is all we have sometimes. Where was the arcade?" "Level 2, near the food court and the cinema," Sarah replied, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. The heart of the initial outbreak. Mr. Henderson, who had been slumped in a corner muttering about insurance policies and contacting head office, suddenly piped up. "The upper levels are a death trap. We should stay put. Wait for rescue." "Rescue?" Marcus snorted, finally pulling out a dusty, rolled-up set of mall blueprints. "You still think someone's coming for us, Henderson? The 911 lines are jammed. The sirens outside aren't police. They're ambulances that aren't going anywhere. We're on our own." He spread the blueprints on the floor, the paper crinkling in the oppressive silence. "This office is a temporary hideout, nothing more. We need supplies, water, food, a way out." Sarah stared at the blueprints, a complex web of stores, corridors, and service tunnels. Her gaze drifted to the section marked Kitty Kingdom Play Zone and Arcade Extreme. So close to the food court. Marcus was probably right, but she couldn't give up on Mikey, not yet. While Marcus and Lena began a tense, whispered discussion about potential routes and risks, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She was just a teenager, a fast food worker. What could she possibly do? Then she remembered the layout of the burger barn, her workplace. It backed onto a narrow service corridor. And in their tiny, cramped break room, there was an old ventilation grate, high on the wall. She'd once joked with a coworker about crawling through it to escape a bad shift. "Marcus," she said, her voice small but determined, "the service tunnels, are they all compromised?" He looked up, surprised. "Most likely. The one near my office was breached. Why?" "My restaurant, Burger Barn, it backs onto one, and there's an air vent in our break room. It's small, but maybe I could fit. See if it leads anywhere safer?" Marcus looked skeptical. "Ventilation shafts, most are dead ends, or too narrow. and noisy. Lena, however, looked at Sarah with new interest. "How small are you talking?" Sarah demonstrated with her hands. "I'm pretty small." She was slender, agile from years of skateboarding. "It might lead to the main duct system. Maybe there's a way to see into other parts of the mall without going out there." She gestured vaguely towards the barricaded door, the horrors beyond. A long silence. Then Marcus nodded slowly. "All right, kid, it's a long shot. But it's better than sitting here waiting for those things to sniff us out." He pointed to a section on the blueprints. "Burger Barn is here. If you can get into the main east-west duct run, it passes over the central atrium, and, further down, near the Titan Warehouse." Titan Warehouse, the huge anchor store at the far end of the mall. It had its own loading docks, its own massive shutters. If any place was still secure, or offered a viable escape route, it might be there. The thought of squeezing into a dark, dusty ventilation shaft, possibly filled with spiders or rats, or worse, one of those things, terrified Sarah. But the image of Mikey's smiling face, the memory of his hand slipping from hers as she'd been pulled away by a panicking coworker, it fueled a desperate courage. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "I have to try. For Mikey." Later, under the dim emergency lights, Marcus pried open the access panel to a maintenance ladder in the office that led up into a narrow crawl space beneath the ceiling plenum. From there, he indicated a larger, insulated duct. "That should be the main feeder. If you can get into that, follow it west. Be careful, make no noise." Sarah, armed with a small flashlight they'd found in the desk and a screwdriver from Marcus's multi-tool, took a deep breath. Lena squeezed her shoulder. "Be safe, Sarah, and if you see any sign at all." She didn't need to finish. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She climbed into the dusty darkness, the air thick with the smell of stale insulation and something else, something faintly metallic and rotten that made her stomach churn. The crawl space was tight, filled with pipes and wires. She found the main duct, a large, rectangular metal tunnel. There was a service hatch bolted shut. The screwdriver slipped several times on the rusty screws, each scrape echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Finally, one gave, then another. She managed to pry the hatch open just enough to squeeze through. Inside the duct, it was even darker, the flashlight beam swallowed by the oppressive blackness. The air was cold, and the metal amplified every tiny sound she made. She crawled slowly, painstakingly, trying to remember Marcus's directions. West, towards Titan Warehouse, and, somewhere below, the arcade where Mikey might have been. After what felt like an eternity of claustrophobic crawling, her knees and elbows raw, she saw a faint glimmer of light ahead, a vertical shaft, with a grill at the bottom. She carefully positioned herself, aiming her flashlight down. Her breath caught. Below her was the vast, cathedral-like space of the mall's central atrium. It was eerily silent, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the emergency lights, and it was filled with them, dozens, perhaps hundreds of the infected, standing motionless or shuffling in slow, aimless circles, a silent, undead congregation. The sheer number was overwhelming. Escape through the main mall was impossible. Then, her light caught something else. Across the atrium, at the far end, were the massive, dark entrances to the Titan Warehouse. Its shutters were mostly down, but one of the large loading bay doors, it looked slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness in the gloom. And around that specific area, there were noticeably fewer of the infected. It was as if that section of the mall was cleaner. Hope, sharp and sudden, pierced through her fear. A chance. But as she adjusted her position to get a better look, her flashlight beam swept upwards, across the wide expanse of the Titan Warehouse's upper facade. And there, for a horrifying instant, silhouetted against a grimy window high up, she saw a figure, not one of the shambling infected. This figure was moving quickly, purposefully, looking down into the atrium. Another survivor? Or something else? Before she could process it, it was gone, disappearing back into the shadows of the vast store. The sliver of hope now felt tainted with a new, chilling uncertainty. Section 5. Marcus. The stale air in the cramped office was thick with unspoken fear. Sarah had been gone for what felt like an eternity, crawling through the guts of the mall while they waited, nerves stretched taut. Leo whimpered in his sleep, and Lena stroked his hair, her face a mask of exhaustion and worry. Henderson just sat, occasionally making a small, pathetic noise. Marcus kept his focus on the blueprints, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety that Sarah's gamble might get her killed, or worse, lead the dead back to them. When the small access panel above them creaked, every head snapped up. Sarah's dirt-streaked face appeared, eyes wide. "The atrium," she whispered, her voice hoarse as Marcus helped her down. "It's full of them, hundreds. But Titan Warehouse, one of the loading bay doors is partly open. And there are fewer infected around that end." She paused, then added, "I saw someone. Up high, in a window of Titan. Just for a second. Moving fast." Marcus processed this. Hundreds in the atrium meant any ground-level traverse was suicide. But a loading bay door, even partly open, at Titan Warehouse, that was their best, maybe only, shot at getting out of this concrete coffin. The figure she saw was a wild card. Another survivor? Or someone who had secured Titan and wouldn't welcome company. "We can't stay here," Lena said, her voice firm, echoing Marcus's thoughts. "We need to get out of the mall entirely." "Agreed," Marcus said. "The route Sarah found through the ducts is too small for all of us, especially with the boy. But if the loading bay at Titan is accessible," he traced a finger on the blueprints, "there's a service corridor that runs parallel to the main concourse, behind the west side stores. It's a longer route, but it might bypass the worst of the atrium. It should come out near the Titan Warehouse employee entrance, close to those loading docks." Henderson, predictably, started to whine. "Service corridors? They're dark. And what if they're full of those things? We should reinforce this office. Wait for help." "Help isn't coming, Henderson," Marcus snapped, his patience worn thin. "And this office is a shoebox. We're out of water, and the snacks Sarah scrounged from Burger Barn won't last another day. We move, or we die here." Lena nodded, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "What's the risk?" "High," Marcus admitted. "We don't know what's in that corridor, and if Sarah saw someone in Titan, we don't know if they're friendly." He looked at the small, desperate group. Lena, fierce and protective. Sarah, young but surprisingly resilient. Henderson, a quivering liability. Leo, innocent and vulnerable. His old cynicism warred with a reluctant sense of responsibility. He was the one with the knowledge, the blueprints, the security background. Like it or not, he was in charge. "All right," he said, making the decision. "Lena, you and Sarah stick close to me. Henderson, you carry the flashlight and stay quiet. If you make a sound that draws them, I'll leave you behind. Understood?" Henderson gulped, nodding mutely, his face pale. They left the relative, if flimsy, safety of the office, prying open the barricaded door to the shoe store stockroom. The store itself was still, eerily silent. Peering out into the main mall corridor, Marcus saw it was clearer than before, but littered with debris and the occasional still form. The bulk of the infected seemed to have gravitated towards the central atrium, as Sarah reported. The entrance to the service corridor was a nondescript metal door at the back of a closed-down electronics store. Marcus used a pry bar from his toolkit to force the lock. The air that puffed out was cold, damp, and carried a faint charnel smell that made his stomach clench. "Flashlight, Henderson," Marcus ordered. The beam cut a swath through the oppressive darkness, revealing a narrow concrete tunnel, pipes and conduits running along the walls. It was blessedly empty, for now. They moved slowly, Marcus in the lead, Lena with Leo held tight, then Sarah, with Henderson bringing up the rear, his hand shaking so much the flashlight beam danced erratically. Every drip of water, every scrape of their shoes, sounded deafening in the silence. The corridor twisted and turned, a subterranean maze. Marcus consulted the blueprints frequently, trying to keep his bearings. They passed a junction where another, darker corridor branched off. A low moan echoed from its depths. Marcus froze, signaling for silence. They waited, hearts pounding, but the sound didn't come closer. He chose the other path. After what felt like hours, navigating by the faint glow of the flashlight and the crumpled map, Marcus stopped. This should be it. Employee entrance to Titan Warehouse should be just around this bend. As they rounded the corner, they saw it, a heavy steel door, slightly ajar. But their relief was short-lived. Blocking the corridor, slumped against the wall, was a figure, an infected. It was large, a former maintenance worker by his overalls, and it was directly in their path to the door. Henderson let out a small, choked gasp. The infected's head twitched, its milky eyes slowly focusing on them. "Damn it, Henderson," Marcus hissed. There was no room to maneuver past it in the narrow corridor. Before Marcus could react, before Lena could shield Leo, Henderson did the unthinkable. Panicked, he shoved Sarah forward, hard. "Get it, distract it," he shrieked, then turned to scramble back the way they came. Sarah stumbled, crying out, right into the path of the lurching infected. It lunged, its decaying hands reaching for her. Section 6. Lena. "No," Lena screamed, raw instinct overriding thought. She pushed Leo behind her, towards Marcus, her eyes locked on Sarah, who was frozen in terror as the grotesque maintenance worker lunged. There was no time for weapons, no time for strategy. Lena launched herself forward, slamming her shoulder into the infected side, just as its grimy fingers brushed Sarah's arm. The impact sent both her and the creature staggering. The infected, top-heavy and uncoordinated, stumbled against the concrete wall with a wet thud, its attention momentarily diverted. "Sarah, get back," Marcus yelled, pulling the terrified girl behind him and Leo. Lena scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. The infected was already turning, its movements surprisingly quick for its bulk. Its jaw, hanging slack, dripped a string of saliva-like fluid. The stench was overwhelming. This was it. No shoehorn this time. Just her, and it, and the desperate need to protect the others. It came at her, arms outstretched. Lena dodged, adrenaline singing through her veins. She remembered the shoehorn, the eye socket, vulnerability. She feinted left, then ducked low as its arms swept over her head. As she came up, she drove her fist, balled tight, into its abdomen. It was like punching a side of spoiled meat. It barely registered. Physical force on the torso was useless. It growled, a sound like air escaping a rotten bellows, and swiped again. This time, its hand connected, nails like broken claws scraping down Lena's forearm, tearing her sleeve and drawing blood. Pain, sharp and hot, shot up her arm. Fear, cold and immediate, followed. A scratch. Was a scratch enough? She ignored the pain, the fear. It was between her and the door to Titan Warehouse, the door to potential safety for Leo. Fury, cold and clear, replaced the panic. She saw an exposed pipe running along the wall, rusted but solid. As the infected lunged again, she sidestepped, grabbed the pipe with both hands, and using it for leverage, kicked out with all her strength, her boot connecting with the side of its knee. There was a sickening crack. The infected's leg buckled unnaturally. It stumbled, its balance gone, and pitched forward, landing heavily on its face with a grotesque splat. It tried to push itself up, one leg dragging uselessly, its moans turning into frustrated gurgles. Marcus was there instantly, his heavy maglite raised. He brought it down on the back of the creature's skull, once, twice, 3 times. The sickening thuds echoed in the narrow corridor. The infected went still. Lena leaned against the wall, gasping, her arms screaming in protest. Sarah was crying, a ragged, terrified sound. Leo was silent, his eyes huge, fixed on the still form on the floor. "Are you bit?" Marcus asked, his voice harsh, turning Lena's injured arm to the dim light. The scratches were long, bloody, but seemed superficial. No deep puncture wounds. I don't think so," Lena stammered, her mind reeling. "Just scratches." But the fear remained, a cold knot in her stomach. How did this infection spread? "We don't have time to find out," Marcus said grimly. "Henderson's gone. Probably zombie chow by now. Good riddance." He pushed open the steel door to Titan Warehouse. "Let's go. We need to get to those loading docks." The interior of Titan Warehouse was vast, cavernous, and eerily silent. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across endless aisles of towering shelves packed with merchandise. It was a stark contrast to the narrow, claustrophobic service corridor. For a moment, the sheer size of it offered a false sense of security. "The loading docks are on the far side," Marcus said, consulting the blueprints again, his voice low. "We need to cross the main store floor. Stay quiet, stay alert." They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows of the towering shelves. The silence was unnerving. Where were the infected? Sarah had seen that figure. Were they being watched? As they neared the central part of the store, a wide aisle that cut through to the other side, they heard it, a faint shuffling, a dragging sound, then another, and another. From the end of the aisle, a group of infected emerged, drawn perhaps by the faint sounds of their entry or some lingering scent. Not as many as in the atrium, but enough to be a serious threat. 5, maybe 6 of them. Damn it, Marcus breathed. Back, we'll go around. But as they turned to retreat, more infected appeared from the aisle they'd just come down. They were caught in a pincer. The loading bay, Lena yelled, pointing past the approaching infected. It's closer to go through them than back. It was a desperate gamble, but retreating meant navigating unknown territory with infected potentially at their heels. Marcus nodded, his face grim. All right, fast and hard. Sarah, stay with Leo. Lena, with me. They charged. Lena, her scratched arm forgotten, felt a weird clarity descend. There was no room for fear now, only action. She grabbed a heavy wrench from a tool display they passed, the cold metal a reassuring weight in her hand. Marcus had his maglite. The infected were slow, but their numbers were a problem. The first one, a woman in a store uniform, lunged. Marcus met her with a brutal swing of the maglite, caving in the side of her head. Lena swung the wrench at another, a teenage boy whose face was a mask of slack-jawed hunger. The wrench connected with his temple with a sickening crunch. He went down. They were a desperate, uncoordinated fighting unit, driven by sheer survival instinct. Lena moved to protect Leo and Sarah, who were huddled behind a pallet of tinned goods. She saw an infected break off from the main group, heading for them. With a cry, she intercepted it, swinging the wrench in a wide arc. It struck the creature in the chest, sending it staggering back, but not down. It lunged again, and she brought the wrench down on its head, again and again, until it finally collapsed. The sounds of the fight, the grunts, the thuds, the wet crunches, were horrific. Leo was screaming, a high, terrified sound that tore at Lena's heart. Almost there, Marcus yelled, pointing towards a set of large, roll-up shutter doors at the far end of the store. One of them, as Sarah had seen, was indeed slightly ajar, a dark gap of about 2 feet at the bottom. Their beacon of hope. They fought their way through the last of the infected, scrambling over fallen bodies, the stench of blood and decay thick in the air. Marcus reached the shutter first. It stuck. He grunted, heaving at it. Power's out. Manual crank is busted. He braced his shoulder against it, trying to lift it further. Lena, help me. Lena joined him, shoving with all her might. The heavy steel door groaned, resisting. Sarah pushed Leo through the gap. Go, Leo, go. Come on, Marcus roared, his face slick with sweat. The shutter moved, an inch, then another, just enough for an adult to squeeze under. Sarah, you next, Lena yelled. Sarah scrambled through. Lena started to follow, but as she ducked under, she heard Marcus cry out, a sharp, agonized sound. She looked back. One of the infected they thought was down, a wiry man with half his face missing, had crawled towards them, unseen in the chaos. It had Marcus by the ankle, its teeth sinking into his boot. Marcus, Lena screamed, trying to go back, but he shoved her hard. Go, get the kid out, there's more coming. His face was contorted in pain, but his eyes were resolute. He kicked out with his free leg, smashing the infected's head, but it held on, its grip like a vice. Behind it, more shadows were moving in the dimness of the warehouse, fresh infected drawn by the sounds of their desperate battle. The shutter. If it came down, Marcus was still half in, half out. Lena reached for the emergency release chain she'd spotted, yanking it hard. With a deafening clang, the heavy steel shutter slammed down, severing their last link to the horrors within Titan Warehouse, and severing something else. As it descended, she saw the infected creature's body get partially crushed, but not before its teeth, with a sickening tearing sound, ripped through Marcus's boot and into the flesh beneath. His scream was cut short by the final, ground-shaking impact of the door. Section 7. Sarah. The clang of the Titan Warehouse shutter crashing down echoed like a gunshot in the sudden, relative silence of the loading bay. Sarah scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and pulled Leo close. The little boy was catatonic with terror, his small body rigid in her arms. Lena was on her knees, staring at the impenetrable wall of steel, her face ashen. "Marcus," Lena whispered, her voice choked. From the other side of the shutter came a muffled, agonized yell, then a series of wet, tearing sounds that made Sarah's stomach churn. Then, silence, a terrible, final silence. Lena sagged, her shoulders shaking. Marcus. He'd been gruff, cynical, but he'd gotten them this far. He'd saved her from that thing in the corridor. And now… Is he? Leo's small voice barely audible. Lena reached out, pulling Leo into a fierce hug with Sarah still holding him. "He saved us, sweetie," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He was very brave." Sarah felt a cold dread creep over her. They were outside the main mall building, yes, in a concrete loading bay area, but they were still trapped. High walls on three sides, the shuttered-up warehouse behind them. The only way out appeared to be down a short ramp leading to a fenced-in yard, and beyond that, the unknown chaos of the city. And Marcus, their guide, their protector, was gone. Or worse. The loading bay itself was cluttered with pallets, discarded packaging, and a couple of parked delivery vans. It smelled of diesel fumes and damp concrete. A sliver of gray afternoon light filtered in from a grimy skylight far above. It was safer than inside for now. No immediate shuffling, no moans. "We need to check him," Lena said suddenly, her voice raw but resolute. She stood up, looking at the bottom edge of the massive shutter. If he's bitten." Sarah understood. The terrifying, unspoken question that hung over every encounter, every scratch. What happened if you were bitten? The movies always had an answer. Reality was proving far more uncertain and far more horrifying. "How?" Sarah asked, her gaze fixed on the unyielding steel. There was no way to lift it from this side without power. Lena's eyes scanned the loading bay, landing on a heavy crowbar leaning against a stack of pallets. Her expression hardened. "We have to try. We can't just leave him." But as Lena moved towards the crowbar, a new sound reached them. Not from behind the shutter, from the yard. A low scraping, then a guttural cough. They froze. Lena slowly turned, her eyes wide with fresh alarm. Sarah clutched Leo tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Peering through a gap in the chain-link fence at the bottom of the ramp, Sarah saw movement. One of them, shambling across the asphalt yard, drawn by the noise of the shutter, or perhaps just wandering. Then another, emerging from behind a dumpster. "They're out here too," Sarah whispered, her brief illusion of safety shattering. Lena's shoulders slumped. Marcus was beyond their help now, and trying to get to him would expose them to new dangers. The weight of the decision, the brutal triage of survival, settled heavily on her. "Okay," she said, her voice flat. "Okay, new plan. We find a vehicle. Get out of here." They began to search the loading bay cautiously. The first van they checked was locked, its windows grimy. The second, a battered white panel van, was also locked. Lena was about to try and smash a window when Sarah, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any new threats, noticed something wedged into the sun visor of a third, larger box truck parked deeper in the bay. "Keys." "Lena," she hissed, pointing. Relief, sharp and potent, flooded through Lena. They hurried to the truck. The keys were indeed there, a greasy ring with a faded Titan Logistics tag. Lena fumbled them into the ignition. The engine turned over, coughed, then reluctantly rumbled to life, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. "Get in," Lena yelled over the noise, pulling Leo into the cab, Sarah scrambling in after him. Just as Lena was about to put the truck in gear, Sarah, looking through the grimy passenger side window, saw something that made her blood run cold. Tucked away in a shadowy corner of the loading bay, behind a stack of empty crates, was a makeshift barricade, a pile of overturned shelving units, cardboard boxes, and a dirty mattress. It was small, flimsy, and had clearly been breached. Strewn around it were signs of a desperate, failed last stand, a discarded baseball bat, dark stains on the concrete, a child's brightly colored sneaker lying forlornly on its side. And then she saw him, curled up behind the remnants of the barricade, so still she almost missed him, was a small figure, a boy. He was wearing a faded blue t-shirt with a cartoon rocket on it. Mikey's favorite t-shirt. Mikey. The name tore from Sarah's throat, a strangled cry of disbelief and dawning horror. She fumbled for the door handle. but Lena grabbed her arm. "Sarah, wait, don't." But Sarah was already half out of the truck, stumbling towards the barricade. "Mikey, is that you?" The boy didn't move. As Sarah got closer, her heart pounding with a terrible premonition, she saw his face. Pale, still, his eyes closed. There was a dark, crusted stain on the side of his neck, partially hidden by his collar. He wasn't sleeping. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. He'd made it out of the arcade. He'd found this place, tried to hide. He'd been so close. She reached out a trembling hand towards his small, still form. A low growl from behind the barricade. Sarah froze. Slowly, a figure rose from the shadows where Mikey lay. It was another child, no older than Mikey, her clothes torn, her face smeared with something dark. Her eyes, though, were not milky and vacant. They were sharp, feral, and fixed on Sarah with a terrifying, animalistic hunger. She wasn't one of the shambling infected. She was something else. And in her small, grimy hand, she clutched a shard of broken glass, its edge stained crimson. Before Sarah could scream, before she could react, the girl lunged, not with the clumsy gait of the infected, but with a horrifying, predatory speed. Section 8, Lena. Sarah. Lena's shout was swallowed by the roar of the truck's engine as she slammed the gear stick into reverse, her eyes wide with horror. The feral child, a grotesque parody of innocence, was on Sarah in an instant, the shard of glass raised. Without thinking, Lena twisted the wheel hard, the back end of the truck swinging around with a screech of tires. The heavy steel corner of the box truck slammed into the makeshift barricade, sending crates and debris flying. The impact threw the attacking child sideways, away from Sarah, who stumbled back, her face a mask of shock and dawning terror. "Get in," Lena screamed, her voice cracking. She leaned across the cab, flinging open the passenger door. The feral child recovered with unnatural speed, snarling, and launched herself at the truck, scrambling onto the running board, her small, dirt-caked fingers clawing at the doorframe. Her eyes, glinting with a terrifying, lucid malice, met Lena's. This wasn't the mindless hunger of the infected. This was something more sinister, more aware. Sarah, galvanized by Lena's cry and the immediate threat, scrambled back into the cab, pulling the door shut just as the child's hand snaked inside. The door slammed on its wrist with a sickening crunch. The child shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman sound, and fell back, clutching its injured arm. Lena didn't hesitate. She rammed the truck into drive, tires spinning on the slick concrete, and aimed for the ramp leading out of the loading bay. The chain-link gate at the bottom was flimsy, secured by a simple padlock. She floored the accelerator. The truck smashed through the gate with a tearing shriek of metal, bursting out into the fenced-in yard. The two infected Sarah had seen earlier were closer now, drawn by the commotion. One of them, a bloated man in a stained business suit, lurched directly into their path. Lena didn't swerve. There was a sickening thud as the truck hit him, sending him flying like a broken doll. The other one, a woman with long, matted hair, clawed at the side of the truck as they sped past, her face a mask of vacant hunger. They were out of the loading bay, out of the yard. The truck bounced over a curb and onto a service road that ran behind the mall. Lena's hands were clamped so tightly on the steering wheel her knuckles were white, her heart hammered against her ribs. Leo was sobbing hysterically in the middle seat, and Sarah was staring blankly ahead, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her face pale and streaked with tears and grime. "Mikey," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. She was. Lena reached out a hand, briefly squeezing Sarah's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. So sorry." There were no other words. The horror of what they'd just witnessed, the dead child, the feral attacker, was beyond comprehension. It added a new, terrifying dimension to the nightmare. It wasn't just the shambling dead they had to fear. The service road joined a wider street. Lena slowed the truck, her adrenaline-fueled urgency giving way to a chilling realization. The city was a disaster zone. Abandoned cars littered the road, some crashed, others simply left with doors hanging open. Smoke plumed in the distance from several locations. The distant wail of sirens was constant now, a mournful chorus of a world falling apart. There was no sign of organized rescue, no military presence, just chaos and desolation. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. The hope that had briefly flickered when they found the truck had been extinguished, replaced by a profound, soul-crushing despair. Lena's mind raced. Marcus was gone. The mall was a death trap. The city was dying. They had a truck, a little fuel, but where was safe? The news reports she'd vaguely registered before the world ended. Had there been talk of evacuation centers, rally points? It all seemed like a distant, irrelevant dream now. I don't know. Lena admitted, her own voice trembling slightly. Away from here. We need to get away from the city. She remembered the news reports, the aggressive flu, the riots. It had been spreading, hadn't it? How far? Leo's sobs subsided into whimpers. He crawled into Lena's side, burying his face against her. Mommy, I want to go home. Lena's throat tightened. Home. Their small apartment, his Blaze Ranger posters on the wall, the smell of her baking cookies. It felt like a lifetime ago, a different universe. I know, sweetie, we will. We have to find a new home, a safe one. She scanned the devastated streetscape. A crumpled map lay on the dashboard, probably left by the truck's last driver. It was a local delivery route map, useless for long-distance navigation. But then she saw something else, tucked into the door pocket, a brightly colored flyer. Westgate Galleria Annual Summer Sidewalk Sale, it proclaimed. On the back, in small print, was a map of the local county, highlighting major roads and towns. And there, circled in red pen, was a small town called Havenwood, about 60 miles north, nestled in the foothills of the mountains. Next to it, someone had scribbled, Rally Point, FEMA? A rally point. It was a sliver of hope, almost too faint to grasp. Was it real? Or an old, forgotten contingency plan from a world that no longer existed? Sarah, Lena said, her voice tight with a mixture of desperation and a new, fragile resolve. Look at this. She handed the flyer to Sarah. Sarah stared at the circled town, the scribbled note. Havenwood, you think? It's something, Lena said. It's a direction. It's north, away from this. She gestured at the ruined cityscape around them. Staying here was a death sentence. The infected were everywhere, and now, those, feral children, what else was out there? The decision solidified. They would go to Havenwood. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a forgotten note on a sales flyer. But it was better than aimless flight. It was a destination. A flicker of purpose in the overwhelming darkness. But as Lena navigated the truck through the increasingly treacherous streets, avoiding debris and the occasional shambling figure, a new, chilling thought struck her. The feral child in the loading bay. She hadn't been like the others. She'd been fast, intelligent, malicious, and she'd been a child. What did that mean? Were there different kinds of infected? Or were some people reacting to the collapse of society in monstrous ways, becoming predators of a different sort? The true nature of this apocalypse, Lena realized with a sickening lurch, was far more complex and terrifying than just mindless, shambling corpses. They had escaped the mall, but they had entered a world where the rules were constantly changing, where new horrors lurked around every corner. The fight for survival was only just beginning, and the enemies were not always who or what they expected. Marcus's pragmatic cynicism suddenly felt less like pessimism and more like a grim prophecy of the world they now inhabited. Section 9. Lena. The journey out of the city was a Dantean descent. Every block revealed fresh horrors, overturned buses, smoldering buildings, and the dead. So many dead, both the shambling infected and the still, silent victims they had claimed. Lena drove with a focused intensity, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. Leo had fallen into an exhausted, troubled sleep, his small head resting on Sarah's lap in the passenger seat. Sarah herself was a study in shock, her gaze vacant, fixed on the unfolding nightmare outside the truck's grimy windows. The image of Mikey, and the feral child who had been with his body, was a fresh, raw wound. Lena knew they couldn't sustain this flight for long. The truck was a gas guzzler, and the needle on the fuel gauge was already dipping towards a quarter tank. They needed supplies, fuel, food, water, and they needed them soon. The scribbled, Havenwood, Rally Point. On the flyer was their only beacon, but 60 miles felt like 1,000 in this ravaged landscape. As they reached the city outskirts, the devastation seemed to lessen slightly, but the sense of abandonment was pervasive. They passed a gas station, its forecourt littered with abandoned vehicles, its convenience store ransacked, windows smashed. Lena hesitated. It was a risk. Gas stations would be obvious targets for looters, and potentially a gathering point for the infected, drawn by the lingering scent of humanity. But they had no choice. "Sarah," Lena said softly, "I need you to stay awake. Watch our backs. I'm going to try and get some fuel." Sarah blinked, her eyes slowly focusing on Lena. She nodded, a flicker of her earlier resilience returning. "Okay." Lena pulled the truck up to a pump, her heart pounding. The silence here was different from the city's cacophony of distant chaos. It was an empty, watchful silence that felt more menacing. She killed the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying every tiny sound. She grabbed the heavy wrench from the floor of the cab. It had become an extension of her arm. "Stay in the truck, lock the doors. If anything happens, if I'm not back in 5 minutes, or if you see them, drive north. Don't wait for me." Lena's voice was firm, but her insides were churning. The thought of leaving Leo, even for a few minutes, was agonizing. Leo stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" "Shh, baby, I'm right here. Just getting something for the truck. You stay with Sarah." She kissed his forehead, a desperate, fierce affection. As Lena stepped out, wrench in hand, the overwhelming stench of stale gasoline and something else, something Swedish and rotten, hit her. She scanned the forecourt. Empty. The store was dark, its door hanging crookedly on one hinge. She tried the pump. Dead. Of course, no power. She remembered seeing siphoning kits in the auto parts aisle of Titan warehouse. Too late for that. She'd have to check the tanks of the abandoned cars. The first car, a battered sedan, had its gas cap missing, its tank dry. The second, an SUV, was the same. Her frustration mounted. They were exposed here, vulnerable. Every second counted. Then, from inside the convenience store, came a sound. A low, dragging scrape. Lena froze, her blood running cold. She motioned silently to Sarah, who was watching her with wide, terrified eyes through the truck's windshield. Sarah nodded, her hand moving to the door lock. Lena flattened herself against the side of the pump island, peering cautiously towards the store. A figure emerged from the shadowy doorway. Tall, gaunt, its clothes hanging in tatters, and infected. It sniffed the air, its head turning slowly, then began to shamble towards the truck. Before Lena could react, another figure appeared from behind the store, then another from the far side of the forecourt. They were converging, drawn by the scent of the living, or perhaps the sound of the truck, however briefly it had run. A trap. This place was a trap. "Lena," Sarah's voice, a panicked cry from the truck. Lena sprinted back to the cab, wrenching the driver's door open. "Start it," she yelled at Sarah, who was fumbling with the keys Lena had left in the ignition. But the infected were closing in, their moans a rising chorus. The first one, the tall, gaunt figure, was almost upon them, its decaying hands reaching. Lena didn't have time to get in. She spun, bringing the wrench around in a desperate arc, connecting with the side of the infected's head. It stumbled, but didn't fall. More were coming. 3, 4, 5 of them, lurching from different directions, cutting off her path to the driver's seat. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Sarah had done it. "Go," Lena screamed, shoving herself against the side of the truck as an infected lunged, its teeth snapping inches from her face. "Get Leo out of here. Go north." She could hear Leo crying, screaming her name. Sarah was yelling something, her face a mask of terror and indecision. Lena kicked out, sending another infected sprawling, then swung the wrench again, cracking a skull. But they were too many. She was being surrounded. A searing pain shot through her left arm as fingernails like claws raked across her skin, deeper this time than the scratches in the mall. She cried out, stumbling back against the truck. This was it. She was going to die here, at this desolate gas station, so Leo could live. The thought brought a strange, grim acceptance. She fought on, a cornered animal, the wrench a blur of desperate motion. She smashed another face, felt bone crunch, but for every one she felled, another took its place. Through a gap in the lurching bodies, she saw the truck begin to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. Sarah was driving away, leaving her, as she should. A wave of despair, colder and more profound than any fear, washed over Lena. She was alone, exhausted, injured. But as an infected lunged, its fetid breath hot on her face, a final surge of defiance coursed through her. She would not make it easy for them. She would take as many of them with her as she could. She roared, a sound of pure, primal rage, and swung the wrench one last time, aiming for the head of the closest creature. The world narrowed to the impact, the grotesque face, the snapping teeth. Then, a blinding flash of pain as something heavy slammed into her from the side, sending her sprawling onto the greasy asphalt. Darkness encroached, filled with the sound of her own ragged breathing and the guttural moans of the dead closing in. Was this how her fight ended? The image of Leo's terrified face, looking back at her from the truck window as it pulled away, was the last thing she saw before the blackness consumed her. Section 10. Sarah. The truck lurched forward, Sarah's hands slipping on the oversized steering wheel. Lena's screams, "Go! Get Leo out of here!" echoed in her ears, a terrible counterpoint to Leo's hysterical cries from the seat beside her. She looked in the rearview mirror, a single, horrifying glance. Lena, a lone figure, surrounded by a swarm of those things, her wrench rising and falling in a desperate, futile dance of defiance. Then she went down. A sob tore from Sarah's throat. She wanted to stop, to go back, but Lena's orders, her sacrifice, burned in her mind. Go north, don't wait for me. She pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, the big truck clumsy and unfamiliar beneath her control. The gas station, Lena, the grasping horrors, they receded in the mirror, shrinking, then disappearing as she rounded a bend, her vision blurred by tears. "Mommy," Leo shrieked, clawing at her arm. "We have to go back for Mommy." "We can't, Leo, we can't," Sarah choked out, wrestling with the wheel and her own overwhelming grief and terror. "She wanted us to go. She saved us." The devastation of the outskirts gave way to a landscape that was less overtly chaotic but suffused with an eerie, unnatural stillness. Fields lay untended. Houses stood dark and silent, their windows like vacant eyes. The occasional abandoned car or distant plume of smoke served as grim reminders that the world they knew was irrevocably broken. Sarah drove numbly, following the faded red circle on the tattered flyer, the word Havenwood, a fragile, almost mythical destination. The fuel gauge, which Lena had been so worried about, now seemed like a cruel joke. They had escaped, but to what, and at what cost? Hours passed. Leo eventually cried himself into an exhausted, hiccuping sleep, curled against the passenger door. Sarah's arms ached, her eyes burned from staring at the endless, empty road. The silence in the cab was heavy, broken only by Leo's troubled breathing and the monotonous drone of the truck's engine. She thought of Marcus, his cynical pragmatism that had, in the end, been a shield. She thought of her brother, Mikey, his small, still form behind that flimsy barricade, the feral glint in the eyes of the child who had been his final companion. And now Lena. Brave, fierce Lena, who had fought like a lioness for her cub, and for Sarah too. The weight of their sacrifices was a crushing burden. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, Sarah saw a sign. Havenwood, 5 miles. A flicker of something, not hope. That felt too extravagant, but a grim sort of relief passed through her. They had made it, or at least, they had arrived at the place on the map. The town of Havenwood, when they finally rolled into it, was not the sanctuary the circled name on the flyer had promised. It was small, eerily quiet, nestled in a valley that already lay deep in shadow. Many houses were dark. A few showed flickering candlelight. There was no sign of FEMA, no organized rally point, no welcoming committee. Just a few bewildered-looking people peering from behind curtains, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Sarah pulled the truck to a stop in what looked like the town square, a small patch of grass with a weathered bandstand. She cut the engine. The silence that descended was absolute, profound. Leo stirred, blinking in the gloom. "Are we there, Mommy?" he mumbled, still half asleep. Then his eyes focused on Sarah, and the memory of what happened hit him. His face crumpled. "Where's Mommy?" Sarah's heart broke. She unbuckled her seatbelt and gathered the small, trembling boy into her arms. "Mommy wanted us to be safe, Leo. She got us here." It was a poor comfort, a hollow echo of the truth. As she held him, staring out at the darkening, silent town, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby storefront. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a hunting rifle. He approached the truck cautiously, his eyes narrowed. More figures appeared behind him, emerging from doorways, equally armed, equally wary. Sarah's breath hitched. Were they friendly? Hostile? In this new world, there was no way to tell. The mall had been a crucible, forging her from a scared teenager into something else. Something harder, something that had witnessed too much. But out here, under the vast, indifferent sky, the rules were different again. The horrors were not confined to concrete corridors. They were everywhere. The man with the rifle stopped a few feet from the truck, his weapon held loosely but ready. His gaze swept over Sarah, then Leo, then the battered, blood-spattered truck. "What do you want?" His voice was low, rough, not unkind, but not welcoming either. "Where did you come from?" Sarah looked at Leo, his small face streaked with tears, looking to her for answers she didn't have. She thought of Lena, her final, desperate fight. The mall, the city, the endless road. It had all been a prelude. This wasn't an ending. This was just another beginning, another unknown. The fight for survival, for a future for Leo, for herself, had just entered a new, terrifying chapter. The brief respite was over. The world outside the mall was vaster, colder, and filled with uncertainties that made the clear-cut horrors of the infected seem almost simpler. Havenwood. It wasn't a haven. It was just another place to try and stay alive. One more day, one more night, and the sun was setting.